So, market failure, basically, in simple definition, is this. This is it. This is your market failure. How does it occur? Well, market failure occurs when the private sector or when the forces of demand and supply do not achieve efficiency. They fail to achieve efficiency. Okay, they are inefficient somehow. In other words, this occurs when the social costs are greater than social benefits. Now, what do we mean by social costs and social benefits? Some of you might not be aware of it. So, we're going to come to that discussion by the end of the class. You'll probably know what exactly this is, and we're going to tie it up together. In the most layman's term, demand and supply forces fail when they do not produce a specific type of a good. And in AS levels, that type of the good in discussion was the public goods. Tomorrow, we're going to have a much larger discussion on this in the next lecture. They fail to produce public goods that consumer needs and wants. Number two, market failure occurs when the markets fail to produce the required quantities. They may sometimes overproduce or underproduce. This would be our discussion in demerit and merit goods, mainly, which is part of your course. And lastly, market fails to produce goods at acceptability low prices. This actually applies to merit goods also and to monopoly as well. Monopolies, as we've learned, produces lesser quantity and charges a higher price. Acceptable prices would have been a little lower. This goes with the merit also. Merit, society says, should be relatively cheaper, while the demerit should be more expensive from the society's point of view, not just from the consumer's point of view. So we'll come to that in a bit. But this is what market failure is when demand and supply fails to achieve efficiency. Let's jump into the discussion. Now, our first idea is about this a rational decision maker. We in economics are always thinking that let's assume that the consumers are rational. Rational matlab they are logical, they are consistent, समझदार लोग हैं, कोई irrational decisions नहीं लेते. Okay? और जब भी वो कोई डिसीजंस लेते हैं वो हमेशा मार्जिन्स पे डिसीजन लेते हैं. मार्जिन्स मतलब हर एक्स्ट्रा यूनिट के ऊपर वो सोचते हैं. So for example, if I want to get another car, my discussion is not going to be about the previous cars that I've bought. It's about the next car that I want to buy. What what is the benefit that it's going to derive me? And remember, it's the same Corolla. I bought the white Corolla and now I'm getting another white Corolla. So I'm thinking to myself, what is the additional benefit I'm going to get from buying this? Okay. So my decisions are on the basis of marginals, हर extra unit. The government is thinking, एक और highway बनाने का, एक और किलोमीटर रोड बनाने का, एक और डैम बनाने का क्या फायदा है? So rational decision makers make decisions at the margin where, let's plant the words, marginal private benefit MPB of the transaction is equals to marginal private cost. They're equal. Private benefit and private cost. Marginal private benefit and marginal private cost are equal. So let's go and see what do we mean by this marginal private benefit. Let's see. It says here, marginal private benefits are defined as the benefits to the individual enjoys from the consumption of an extra unit of good. So if, let's say, chips, if I consume one more packet of chips worth 20 rupees, I'm saying that that packet actually gave me the benefit or the satisfaction or the utility of rupees worth 20. The willingness of consumer to pay for that extra unit is determined by the extra benefit that he enjoys. If you say have one more, not just one, have one more. So for the first one I said I got the benefit of, let's say, 20 rupees worth. Okay. But for the second one, law of diminishing utility says that it's actually going to fall. It's not going to be as much. Now, for the second packet, I'm more interested in paying maybe 15 rupees. For the third packet, I might be interested in paying, let's say, 10. So let's not do the numbers, but I guess you get the idea. The law of diminishing marginal returns or utility suggests that as you're consuming more of a good, the satisfaction from each extra unit falls down, and that's what your demand curve is. Actually, that's what your marginal private benefit is as well. Now, let me dissect this word, marginal private benefit. Marginal is about one extra unit. So, whenever I'm having one extra unit, private word says that I have to pay for it. It's not for free. I'm willing to pay a price for it. And benefit is about some sort of satisfaction, utility that is driven from it. So that's what marginal private benefit is. For example, if I go on a highway and I have to pay a toll and then I go use the highway and I reach Hyderabad quickly, as compared to taking a national highway where I don't have to pay anything but it takes me longer time. So if I'm taking the super highway and I'm reaching Hyderabad quickly, well, I'm paying a price. That's my marginal private benefit to the time I'm going to save. You understand that? That's what the private benefit is. In other words, it's actually the demand curve. Now, our second idea is the marginal private cost. Private cost kya hai? So let's dissect the word. Marginal means one extra unit. Now, when we're discussing in terms of cost, that means we're thinking from the perspective of the producers doing the production. So marginal is one extra unit को जब बनाने के लिए the monetary expense that I have to pay, the cost that I have to pay. Okay? Like for example, for making these chips, I have to pay for the raw material. I have to pay the wages. I have to pay for the interest. All of these are the costs that I have to pay for making those chips. So the thing is, since resources are scarce, in order to produce more, I have to acquire more resources, and in order to acquire more resources, I have to pay a higher price for these resources. And that's how my marginal private cost or the supply curve looks like. Over here, I'm going to write marginal private cost because I'm making for the private cost. And over here, it's the marginal private benefit. If I put a price ka tag over here, then I'll be looking in terms of prices. If I put private benefit over here, then I'm looking at different values over here, the satisfaction values. We need a conversion rate, obviously, as we did in the first chapter. So, in fact, even the marginal private benefit is equals to demand curve, which is actually equals to the marginal utility also. That's even fine. But different chapter में different perspectives हैं. So the thing here is, in terms of marginal private cost, supply says this is the willingness and ability of producers. For this price, they are willing and able to supply this much. Why? Because they have to acquire more resources. The private cost goes up in order to produce more. यहाँ पे MPC is actually equals to the supply curve, again because we're thinking from the perfectly competitive markets point of view, not from the imperfect markets. Imperfect markets में MPC is not equals to the supply curve. Only in perfect competition MPC is equals to, yeah, MC is equals to the supply curve, only in perfect competition. So now that we have our private benefit and the private cost, so we'll go back to our idea that a rational decision maker makes decisions at the margin where MPB is equals to MPC. This is it. MPB is equals to MPC. When MPB is equals to MPC, that means that your marginal private benefit is equals to marginal private cost, which means that the demand is equals to supply, which means you're at an equilibrium from the rational consumer point of view. Quantity demanded is equals to quantity supplied. Area below the demand curve and above the market price represents the consumer surplus. Area above the supply curve and below the price consumers are paying is the producer surplus. If you add them both together, you get the society's welfare, because consumers and producers both are part of the society. We say at equilibrium, you will have the maximum social welfare. We did not do this in the past classes, but in overall our actual proper lectures, we have had a discussion on efficiencies. We had a discussion that there are two efficiencies, main two efficiencies, otherwise there are three. One is the allocative efficiency, one is the productive, and the condition we set for allocative efficiency is that you should be producing at a point where P is equals to MC. Well, we've learned in the market structures that demand curve is P and AR, all of that. So we know that P is actually the demand curve, and in perfect competition, supply is the MC curve. So when demand is equals to supply, we've learned that this is the highly efficient point, and over here we've seen that how demand is the private benefit and supply is the marginal private cost, and if they are equal, then the economy is at allocative efficiency point of view. So from the rational consumer's perspective, the market is producing at the best price, is producing the best quantity. There is no excessive shortage or surplus, nothing. Okay, so that means the market is not failing, the demand and supply is working perfectly fine. Then why are we studying this in market failure? So our idea is telling us, let me go over it. It says the cost and benefits are private because they are directly related to those involved in the process of consumption and production. Directly involved. Okay? The marginal private benefit is the demand curve because it shows the value of the benefit put on the consumption, as we've had this discussion. On the other hand, the supply curve is the marginal private cost of production कि हर एक्स्ट्रा यूनिट को प्रोड्यूस करने की कॉस्ट क्या है, and it always increases. So all of this is fine, and this is meeting. Market is efficient. So why is the market failing? The market is failing because of this. Externalities. Market is not taking externalities into consideration. What are these externalities? Well, these externalities are the costs or the benefits. They are the costs or the benefits that applies to the third party, for which they do not get compensated or do not pay for. In layman's term, when the producer produces and the consumer consumes, there is always third party involved who is neither paying for that good in terms of cost or consumption, but they are indirectly getting affected by it. Okay? As far as these externalities go, well, these externalities are the third party effects. Now, iske andar there are four ways we can go in our discussion. Pehla, marginal external benefit. External benefits are the third party. So I'll write it is the third party effect. Now, this third party effect can be positive, so we're going to call it positive externality in, since we're talking a benefit तो consumption के perspective से ले लेते हैं, positive externality in consumption, and it can actually be on the negative side also. It can create a negative externality, third party के ऊपर एक negative effect. So we're going to call it negative externality in consumption. Some of you might get an idea what we're talking about. We're talking about merit and demerit goods. Merit goods has a third party advantage. Completely unrelated, but they are getting a benefit out of it, like healthcare, education. You pay, right now we're in a pandemic. You pay for the mask, you wear the mask, you are protected. That's your private benefit. The third party benefit is that you and producer के बीच में जो transaction हुई है society के अंदर एक layman third party is not going to get the virus. Why? Because you were wearing the mask probably. So they do not get affected. So that's actually a merit good. But the same can go into the negative side. For example, it could be about the cigarettes. You're paying for it and you're smoking. You get the benefit from it. You say the private benefit is good. But what about the external benefit, the negative effect जो society के ऊपर fallen हो रहा है in terms of the passive smoking or the cigarette butt इधर उधर and the trash that you're throwing around. So that's a negative externality. Well, that needs to be discussed also. तो ये तो हो गए तुम्हारे marginal external benefit, both positive and negative. Similarly, you have marginal external cost. Now again, since it's external, it is the third party effect. Now this effect can be beneficial. Now whenever you're doing production can also create a positive externality in production, and it can create a negative externality in production. So basically you have done plenty of this, the negative externality in production. This is about all that noise, smoke, pollution and congestions and stuff like that, traffic congestion. And whereas positive externalities is one of those that third party benefits. For example, they say research and development is one of the positive externality in production. Why? One company does research and development and they pay a price for it. Let's say again abhi vaccines ki production ke andar aa jata hai. A couple of companies, they come up with the formula, they spend a lot of money in the research development, they came up with the vaccine. That's their marginal private cost because they had to pay for that research and development. Now, we'll assume just for the sake of the society, they release that research and development in an open source location. So now that any farmer can actually access that information and they can produce it. So now the third party is going to be benefiting from the production of that research and development that was done by the first firm who actually paid for it. So, for the firm who paid for it, that's a private cost, and you have a positive external cost or positive externality in production for the firms who had access to that information. Okay, so once we have the externalities, let's talk about the social. Now, the social benefit in the society, you have people who pay and consume, and you have the external benefits that you need to take into account. So, social benefit is actually equals to the marginal private benefit plus the marginal external benefit. Depending on whether it's plus or minus, you will deal with it separately. But the main idea is social benefit includes both private and external, because in society you have both first party, second party, and the third party. So, how would the demand curves for this look like? Let's go over this. So, let me place the benefits here and the quantity. We've seen how the demand curve looks like, the marginal private benefit curve looks like, which is actually the same thing as the demand curve. So, for this quantity, the benefit the consumers place on it is this much. Okay, this is the benefit they place on it. Now, let's say 400. Okay, that's the benefit they're placing on it. If this good has third party advantage, positive third party advantage. So the thing is, at this quantity, this is looking only at the private benefit. So let's say the social benefit, the external benefit is another 200. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an external benefit to it of 200. Actually, it's going to be added at every price level. And so it's going to shift my curve upwards by the external benefit. The distance over here is the positive external benefit. It's the positive marginal external benefit. And so when I add it to my private benefit, it becomes my marginal social. All right. So in a way, the social benefit is greater. अगर ये मेरा डिमांड कर्व होता और ये मेरा D1 होता, तो I would have said the demand has increased. But the demand is not increasing. We're just looking at the social benefit is actually greater than the private benefit. This would be true for a good which creates a positive externality, which in our discussion is going to be the Bennett good in the future, in the next lecture. So the vertical distance over here is measuring the additional externality. This black dotted line is measuring the private benefit. So at this QO, all the way up till here, they have the private benefit plus the external benefit. So it represents the social benefit. Okay. So this is a good which has positive effect on the society. What if this good was actually people were willing to pay for, that's the benefit they're deriving from it, but it has a negative effect of 200 on the society. If that was the case, then your negative externality would have been this much. And the social benefit for this curve would actually be on the left hand side. This is representing the negative marginal external benefit. The social benefit is less than the private benefit. This is for the harmful goods. Third party nuksan kar raha hai. These social benefits, which are ignored by the private rational consumers, are the market failure in our discussion. They don't look at the social benefit and they do not look at the negative social benefit. Anyhow, as far as the social cost goes, social cost is simply your marginal private costs, the ones that you have to pay for in order to produce the goods, and then there are some external costs, third party ka nuksan or fayda that is involved. So you need to take that into consideration. If it's like something like a negative effect, for example, you have you have a shipping corporation and you drill oil, and oil की cost है to drill and pay the labor and all of that, so that's your private cost. But let's suppose every now and then there's a lot of oil spillage, that's a cost to the society. So it's a negative cost to the society. So you're going to include that in your original cost if you want to work out the social cost for it. The social cost will be higher than the private cost. Why? Because that's a third party cost. We should take that into consideration. So, using that idea, now let's take a look at. So, from the cost point of view, this is my marginal private cost. For this quantity, let's assume the cost that producers have to bear is 400. What if the production process of this good actually hurts the environment also, and there are some negative externalities that are created from it? And so you need to take that negative externalities into consideration and add that to your private cost. And when you add that to your private cost, what you see is that your supply curve actually shifts upwards. ये मेरा private cost है, social cost है. The social cost is greater than the private cost because I am taking into consideration the negative effects of production. Okay, that's the negative externality. This right here represents the negative externality in production. On the other hand, what if the production of this good actually benefits the society in such a way that it sort of reduces the cost to the society? For example, like I mentioned about the research and development of the pandemic vaccine, and when one firm did it, they bore the cost for it, and the rest of them basically got it for free. So, in a way, the society ki cost is going to fall down because now there are not so many firms trying to figure out do their own individual research and development in order to come with the vaccine. So firm took the private cost, and the rest of them basically did not have to pay for it. So that's really going to save a lot of money and benefit the society in a way. It could also be a good something जिसकी production के process के अंदर instead of creating negative effects on the society, it actually creates a positive effects on the society. So उस case के अंदर the social cost is going to go down rather than going up. Okay, it could be even like to solve this problem we have this, that whenever you cut down a tree you plant a tree. So whenever you cut down a tree there is a cost involved in it, but when you plant a tree you know that in the future that cost is not going to be as bad. It might be the same or it might even improve, considering the wildlife improvement and things like that might happen as a result of it. But in short, what you need to know is that your social cost can be higher or it can be lower. If the social cost goes up, that means negative externality in production is involved. If your social cost falls down, that means there is some sort of positive externality involved in this process. All right. So, what we've done is marginal private benefit. And we say marginal private benefit is the benefit to those consumers and producers who are directly involved in the production or consumption of the good. Then we did marginal external benefit, and these are the third party effects. It can be both positive and negative when a consumption of a good takes place. Then we did the marginal private cost, which is the cost of producing a good to the producers or the cost to the consumers for buying that. And इसके अंदर certain costs have to be paid again by the people, consumers, and the producers who are directly involved in the production process. And somebody has to pay a price for it. And marginal external costs are those third party people who are getting affected by it and they had nothing to do with this, with the production of this. Okay? When you add them both together, you basically get the marginal social benefit. And when you add these two together, you get the marginal social cost. So, in the notes, we've had a discussion with the case of a dam. So, let's continue with that, just for reminding you that again, the discussion has to be in terms of marginal. So, one extra dam, it can be even like one extra factory that the government decides to produce, one extra highway, one extra airport, all of that. So, when you are thinking about constructing one more dam, the values are that the consumers, who are the consumers who are going to consume the services of the dam? Well, to the producer, it's the revenue of electricity. From the consumer's perspective, it's the benefit of getting electricity. They'll have to pay for it and they will get the benefit from it. So perspective ki baat hai, producers ka benefit will be the revenue and consumers benefit will be the consumption of the good, the satisfaction they will get from it. Or a stable water supply, uska revenue. Or maybe they might use it, the dam, to go from one side to the other, so there might be like tolls ka revenue, or it could be for the tourism purpose, as our discussion was earlier. So these are all private benefits because you're paying to get this electricity, you're paying to get this water, you're paying to travel through it, you're paying to get yourself entertained through tourism, and you're getting the benefit. Like, for example, if there is a highway and there is a toll, I use that highway to go to Hyderabad and I reach a lot faster. Well, I could have taken the other route also, but that's a lot slower. So, if I paid for it, that's private. And the benefit is in terms of the time I'm going to save, the fuel that I'm going to save. That's my personal benefit because I'm paying to get that. On the other hand, what's the third party advantage of a dam? We said stuff like could be the flood protection the third party is getting, the nearby areas, they're not going to get flooded anymore. Or it could be the nearby fishermen and agriculture lands which are going to benefit from water and fishing and all of that, and they can generate some revenue from it. So let's say the marginal private benefit I place on it is 400, and the external benefit I place on it is 200. Okay. On the other hand, from the production point of view, in order to construct this dam, certain costs has to be paid. Okay. The cost of raw material, wages, interest, okay, etc. All these different costs that you have to pay. Those are your marginal private benefits, engineer key cost, and all of that. That's my private cost. And let's say that private cost comes up to 500. Now let's take a look at the external costs for it. The external costs are going to include maybe smoke and noise pollution. Those are the negative ones. It could include displacement of people. They'll have to leave the area, and that might have a psychological impact on them. Uske alawa, it could be like environmental damages. Okay. And as a result, we say, okay, so the total value of these is 100 also. Okay. When we add them up together, what do we get? So our social benefit is 600 and our social cost is also 600. Okay. Social benefit is equals to the social cost. If the government was to do this project, the government would continue with this project because the social benefit is equals to the social cost. In fact, the government would take any project as long as the marginal social benefit is greater or equals to the marginal social cost. The government will undertake the project. Why? Because according to them, the social benefits are greater than social cost. But what about the private sector? Well, the private sector is not going to look at these values. The private sector, as we had a discussion right at the beginning, that what the rational decision makers are thinking are private benefit and private cost. So, on that note of private benefit and private cost, they're just going to look at these values. And over here, we can clearly see that the private cost is greater than the private benefit. So, this particular dam, the market is not going to produce. From the market's point of view, there is a loss to them. But from the society's point of view, this dam is actually not harmful because the external benefits outweighs the external cost. Okay, the government will not do the project in the case that the social benefit is actually less than the marginal social cost. So let me conclude the idea. If it was about private benefit and private cost and the intersection, then the markets are working efficiently. But now we're saying that markets do not take externalities into consideration and say, so they're not looking at the bigger picture of social benefits and social costs. And that's where the market is failing. As we saw in this diagram, according to the social welfare, this dam should have been constructed. But from the private sector point of view, this dam will not. And so, therefore, the quantity required is not enough. And so, there is inefficiency and a market failure.